Today I'll be speaking to Andrew Hine, UK Head of Healthcare at kpmg, about the efficiency challenge facing the NHS. In a wide-ranging interview, we discussed the implications of delivering £15 to £20 billion of efficiencies over the next 4 years for both commissioners and healthcare providers. Andrew, thank you for joining me. Perhaps you can give me your view on the scale and the nature of the efficiency challenge for the NHS.
Okay, Alistair. Well, if we start from the question of 15 or 20%, and I think that's clearly widely accepted as the Nicholson challenge, so to speak, it's clear that something of that scale is going to be required. But we do need to remind ourselves that this is an efficiency challenge, not a simple, straightforward cost-cutting cash challenge. And the interesting thing for me is for the service to view that as an opportunity to redistribute the way in which funds are used within any given health economy, whilst actually the funds in the total health economy at least remain the same. So it's about how we use funds. It's not a straightforward cutting cash challenge. It very much is an efficiency question.
And what would you define as the difference between an efficiency approach and a cost-cutting approach? And how do you think NHS trusts are following an efficiency approach as opposed to a cost-cutting approach?
Okay, the key question for me is whether we view this at the level of the individual organisation or whether we view this at the level of the health economy, to coin a phrase. And the resources that are flowing into any given health economy or PCT area broadly will be, at least in cash terms, the same going forward. There are inflation pressures that mean in real terms there may be a reduction. But the question is how the different parts of the system come together to use those resources in a different way, because the totality of the resource will be at least the same. An individual organisation may need to give things up, may need to become more efficient, and its budget might go down. But the system that it is part of will have at least the same resources with which to design, procure, and provide better care in greater volumes.
Let's examine the efficiency challenge for different parts of the NHS. Let's address commissioners first of all, for primary care trusts as we have now, and for GP commissioners that are going to develop over the next couple of years.
Okay, now clearly the major change here is one of scale. It's unclear at the moment exactly how many GP consortia we're going to end up with, but a general concern clearly is that that may lead to a fragmentation and it may be more difficult to redesign care at the health economy level. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I think PCTs at the moment are capable of coming together and federating to organise in different ways to create scale, and I expect that GP consortia will be able to do that, and we're already seeing signs of that. So the challenge for the commissioner, be they a PCT or a GP commissioner in the future, is going to be how do you actually change models of service which are quite well embedded so that you get care delivered in different ways, using technology differently, using staff differently, and using capital estate differently. Because if we look internationally, there are models of healthcare across the world that might make less use of highly expensive, highly capitalised acute hospital resource than we tend to in the UK. And making that change is the commissioner challenge, be they a PCT or a GP commissioner.
What do you think would be the most effective commissioning structure in the next 3 to 4 years?
Well, the first thing to say is it actually will, I think, be pretty unhelpful if we don't recognise the fact that there is a development for GP commissioners to go through in the same way as primary care trusts had to learn to be commissioners, and we're on a journey around that. GP commissioners need to learn some new skills, and we need to recognise that. So we cannot just fragment the whole system and expect it to operate in the same way as it did before. One of the things that we believe is that it will be necessary for GP consortia to band together to share certain supporting services and scarce expertise. So we don't expect to see a model where there are hundreds of GP consortia, each operating very independently of one another. That simply wouldn't enable them to do the job properly.
Okay, now let's move on to the second aspect of the commissioning challenge. How do you think commissioners should change the way they buy healthcare services? And have you any international examples that perhaps show the way?
Well, if you look internationally, I think it's a common feature that care is in many systems, not in all by any means, but in many systems, there is a greater organisational integration, so it is easier for care to flow from secondary via community to primary care and vice versa. And the simple model that we have, for good historic reasons, of great separation between those parts of the system in the UK, is that there is little incentive. If you're running a foundation trust, you are rewarded and you are paid for admitting patients to your environment. If you had the opportunity to be paid for caring for that patient in a whole variety of different settings and different ways, you might be incentivised differently. So integration of services to create more options without these organisational disincentives is, we think, a key feature of the future. And if you examine, many people clearly have looked at Kaiser, but you look at other systems in Europe and you look at other systems in the Far East, which we've recently been looking at, there are examples of much, much shorter lengths of stay and equal or better quality outcomes by better use of technology, use of staff in different ways to enable people to leave hospital or not even to go there in the first place.
How do NHS commissioners incentivise and drive the development of integrated care within their health economy?
Ultimately, this is in part an organisational question, which is sometimes outside of the remit of GP commissioners or PCTs. But if you assume that it is possible for community services and acute services to come together in a single organisation, then commissioners should be looking to commission for a given condition and create an incentive for the provider to provide that in the lowest cost, clinically appropriate setting. At the moment, what we're doing is we're saying, if you treat this patient with this need in this setting, we'll pay you this. If you treat them in that setting, we'll pay you something else. And actually being willing to commission for the condition and to allow the provider, to incentivise the provider to change the models of care could take us a long way to unlocking the traditional kind of very sterile acute community separation.
Do you think the government's desire to have more competition within the provider sector advantages or disadvantages that kind of approach, the development of that kind of approach?
I wouldn't think about it in those terms broadly, but I would suggest that it is perfectly appropriate to have a competitive model with that. In fact, I think organisations that embrace integration and are able to do that will generate a competitive advantage. If they use technology in the ways that have been seen through things like the Whole Systems Demonstrator Programme, then they will be able to demonstrate that patients can be cared for more conveniently for them, at high quality, and remain in their homes. That's going to have a cost saving if it's done in the right way. Organisations that do that will generate a cost advantage over organisations potentially that don't. So it may actually enable competition to flourish and thrive very successfully.
Andrew, let's now explore the impact of the efficiency challenge on providers. First of all, let's look at how the need for to deliver savings, whether through the needs to deliver organic savings themselves or savings driven by their purchasers, by commissioners, how that will what challenges that will particularly present to providers over the next sort of 18 months, 2 years?
Yeah, this is undoubtedly going to be a very challenging period. I mean, there are organisations in the current financial year that are already showing signs of distress, and the closer we get to the end of the financial year, we expect there to be more of those. And that's in an environment where overall we expect the service to balance in this year. So our thinking about that, my message about that point would be organisations need to be acting now. To have a good programme for cost and efficiency improvement and quality improvement in the next financial year, you need to be working on it now. You need a programme that delivers in April and May and June and July, and isn't of the more traditional NHS style, which is backloaded. So there are efficiencies that providers can generate themselves in back offices, in clinical support services, and in frontline services. But also, we would strongly encourage providers to be talking with their partners and potentially their competitors in their health economy about how care could be redesigned so all achieve a benefit. It's examples like that that we know from other sectors. If you look at other industries, look at retail, look at automotive, the way that the different parts of the supply chain, or the health economy in our terminology here, collaborate to create a win-win situation through the supply chain is what has been done to enable quality and efficiency to improve in those industries. And we believe the same kinds of approaches can enable providers to meet this challenge. But the key message is start now. There is genuinely no time to lose, because this year may not be too bad, but if you don't act now, next year will be very difficult.
I was going to say that if you start now, you've already left it too late. Shouldn't you have started a year ago?
You probably should, but that period of time is gone. What you can control is what you do now. There's no point kind of crying over spilt milk. Perhaps you should have started, but you can start now. There is time now to develop a good programme leading into next financial year. The criminal thing, potentially, would be to start working on this in March or April. And that's been done in many organisations for all kinds of reasons over time, but that mustn't happen on this occasion.
I want to turn now to the chronology of savings. What should be sort of the first things that are on any acute trust's chief executive's to-do list when they're looking to drive efficiencies in the short term?
Okay, so the key point there is it's about short-term quick wins, as we term them, that actually buy you the time or create the investment to do the longer-term things. There are actually some quite substantial tax opportunities that remain available to healthcare organisations, and we are very confident that if you, with appropriate technical advice, look at the tax position of your organisation, that can often generate short-term cash. Moving from that, there are undoubtedly issues about how you control the use of staff, and it's the old issue of agency staff and headcount control, which we know has been around for a long time, but in many organisations the workforce numbers are still increasing. Control of those and challenge around developing models of shared service and other back office things. So some of those, particularly the shared service issues, take some time, but tax, control of headcount, control of procurement are short-term quick wins that can generate you cash immediately to invest in the longer-term processes.
What approach do you think trust chief executives should take towards staff pay?
Okay, well, the first thing is it's absolutely the single largest cost, and appropriately, therefore, a substantial amount of attention should be given to that. Looked at from the position that I'm in now, and I was an NHS employee for 15 years, the absence of a linkage between performance at the individual level and the organisation's objectives is quite stark. The organisation that I work in now, in other industries, you create a much closer linkage between the success of the organisation and the success of the individual. Clearly, Agenda for Change has automatic incremental progression, to some extent. And we think that a change in the relationship between individual reward and organisation success may be appropriate.
Perhaps you could give us an example of how the pay of a hospital consultant or a nurse might be linked to the performance of an organisation within the context of Agenda for Change and the pay agreements that we have in the NHS. Or do you have to leave those agreements behind to do the kind of things that you're talking about?
Okay, you may need to leave elements of those behind. I mean, they were negotiated at great length and at a particular point in time, and I'm not saying throw those away regardless, but I do believe it is appropriate in the current environment for us to look again at whether we can introduce variations on those. The key thing for me is I am interested in seeing quality and outcome, and I'm interested as a taxpayer and I'm interested as a service user in that. So we have a whole variety of assessments of organisational performance, be it financial performance, quality performance through the various clinical governance regimes and things. And I believe it is possible at a very simple level to link the reward of individuals and the success of their organisation against some of those key indicators. Now, if we move in that direction, we need to get a lot more sophisticated about what are the indicators at a specialty or a departmental level. But actually, why shouldn't people share in the success of their organisation and be expected to address themselves to achieving that success, where that success aligns with the needs of patients? If it's about creating great cardiology services that overtly and externally can be identified as high quality, then we should incentivize people to move in that direction and reward them when they put in the effort and are successful.
Right, we've talked a lot about service redesign. You came back to it just then. One of the judgments that boards will be having to make is return on investment. Not only the scale of the efficiency that's delivered, but also how quickly that efficiency is delivered. What kind of judgments, what kind of, how should trusts go about determining which service redesign is appropriate for the efficiency challenge right now?
Yeah. It's a striking piece of experience that we had, perhaps in the previous turnaround period, is that many organisations that we worked with had never really differentiated the services that they had responsibility for in terms of the relative performance of those services and actually the relative strategic importance. Many organisations we worked with were seeking to be, in effect, all things to all people. What we would encourage boards to do is think about what are the services that your organisation does excel at or should excel at, and focus your attention on both the quality and the efficiency agenda around those. Not try and do things in a completely undifferentiated way. Because if you try and eat the elephant in one go, then you're going to find that very difficult. The need is to prioritise onto the agendas, onto the services that are most important to you. And even our largest and most complex teaching hospitals ought to have, and do increasingly have, but ought to have, a range of priority between the services that they are absolutely leading at and they intend to remain leading at, and those that they want to be provide a good general service for their local population. That differentiation is really important to having a good strategic drive around quality and efficiency.
What sort of things should trust boards look for when they're setting up shared services?
Okay, clarity around contractual relationship. You have to become a good manager, a good specifier and a good manager of that contractual relationship to get the benefit. You do not have to control every element, in effect, of your supply chain in order to get quality and efficiency. Look at other sectors, all other parts of industry and the supply and the supplier side, the service sector, they quite routinely manage their supply chain in this way. And what you are able to do by doing that is get scale and get expertise that you cannot expect to have and own on your own right as a smaller organisation. The key thing, therefore, is how you specify the outcomes and manage against them and have contractual terms that relate to that.
But what advice could you give about getting that specification right? Because it's not a skill set that is widely available within NHS at the moment, because it hasn't been done widely.
And I wouldn't expect it to be necessarily, and in many other industries it doesn't exist in every organisation. Clearly that's an area where external advisors can help people do that and can be incentivised to share the reward associated with these things. So do not expect to have all that expertise in your own organisation. Those with whom you are contracting, it is their business to be able to run these contracts, and you need to ensure that you have similar expertise on your side of that relationship. In the long term, you may develop that yourselves. In the short term, use external sources of advice to make sure you have that on day one.
The government has said that it wants all trusts to be foundation trusts by April 2015. Do you think that's possible? Do you think all trusts will make it, and what do you think will happen to those who don't?
Okay. In terms of the question about will all make it, it is getting an increasingly challenging hurdle to pass, and quite rightly so. In the current environment of economic uncertainty, the tests that Monitor is rightly applying are pretty searching. I think they're certainly more searching than they were in the early waves. So I think not all organisations realistically in their current form will be able to pass that challenge on that timetable. What becomes of those that can't? Then I think realistically we are looking at models of merger, of acquisition, or indeed as the East England SHA is doing at the moment in relation to Hinchingbrook, looking at a completely different commercial model for that. So we need to be creative. Question about merger and acquisition will be, if these organisations are very difficult to take to foundation status, what is the incentive for acquiring or partner organisations to engage with them? That is a difficult question which you can only answer on a case-by-case basis.
Let's look now at board governance. We've seen the governance challenge in the NHS change quite significantly over the last 10 years. What are the implications for board governance from the efficiency challenge?
The key thing, I think, is about the information that boards see. In the time that I was on a number of boards in the NHS, actually the quality of information that boards saw on efficiency, on relative efficiency, was actually pretty poor in many cases. So whilst boards were seeking to do the best job they could, they didn't have all the business information necessary to do that. Now that's better than it was, but still the premium needs to be not on how are we doing type information, but how are we doing relative to our peers, and how are we doing relative to where we could be? Because that will lead you, boards, to ask the question. Now, the other issue about governance and efficiency is going to be in the change from PCTs to practice-based commissioners. And that is a complex governance challenge as we transition from one model to another. And there is clearly a risk of a weakening governance position in that transition. I believe it is really important that PCTs understand and focus on the really critical legacy challenge that they have about handing over into practice-based commissioning organisations a well-governed organisation and starting to manage that transition now.
Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you.